Welcome back, Sentinel Warriors. We are so excited that you are tuning in for our second round of episodes of 2420, where you can get information from 20th Air Force leaders in about 20-ish minutes, delivered on the 20th of each month. This is Lieutenant Emily Seaton from 20th Air Force Public Affairs, and for this episode, Major General Mike Lutton is with the Wing Commanders and Helicopter Group Commander once again, and they will be discussing leadership philosophy, struggles, decision-making, and how to provide valuable feedback. Let's go ahead and get started.
Hey, welcome back to the second episode of 20 for 20, Becoming a Leader. We talked in the first episode about the path to leadership. Now you're on that path, and how do you develop yourself as a leader? And I'd ask Kathy Barrington, who is the first leader that you remember in the Air Force, and what was their impact on you?
Well, sir, I joined the Air Force Academy in 1993. And the first leaders would have been those first cadets in basic training who were suddenly in my face making stuff happen.
Right.
But at the same time teaching me about
Right.
what I needed to do and helping mold me into who I became.
Yeah.
And then another very influential leader would be my husband. He's 2 years ahead of me, and I got to see him as a commissioned officer getting involved, getting out there volunteering and doing some amazing things. And literally as a cadet, I took notes. I wrote down that he's volunteering for extra things at work. He is getting to know what's going on across the base that he was at, and it was tremendous. So that's a very formal leadership setup and an informal leadership setup. Both were very impactful in my life.
So if you look at that, and your husband was impactful on you as a leader, how did that help you really address challenges later on that you may have encountered when you became a commissioned officer and a leader?
So the value is that I've got somebody at home who understands the Air Force way of life, and he's a missile maintenance officer, I'm a missile operator. He largely understands our business. So when something happens or I need to bounce something off of him, he is an incredible listener, incredibly even-keeled. Mm-hmm. So it's just easier to arrive at solutions when I talk it through with him.
Yeah. A lot of our listeners may not realize that struggling as a leader is something that is very common among all of us, as senior officers, all the way down to NCOs and airmen. So F-15, what's one thing that you struggled with as a leader? And more importantly, how did you overcome that?
When I was CGO, I think I felt my struggles where I didn't get recognized how I thought I deserved to be recognized, which may not be just because it was in my mind. Didn't mean that was really that I deserved it. But I think the biggest struggle for me was, how do I have the opportunity? My passion is to lead airmen, mm-hmm. and I wanted to continue doing it as many times as possible. And I wasn't joint qualified, so I was being told that I wouldn't be considered for wing command. So it made me frustrated, made me upset, and broke my heart when I left Malmstrom as the OG, because I thought I was never gonna come back. So then I looked to see what we could do to make it possible. And then I was very fortunate to have several people in my corner to find opportunities, maybe a unique path to be able to get where I was. Part of leadership is recognizing when the struggle's worth it, or then when it's not, and then walk away.
Right, and just exploring that a little more. I mean, you encountered something that might have been an obstacle, but just as an outsider looking on that situation, I think Ron and I would never say that you struggled.
Oh, I think so.
It was getting the institution to understand, okay, these are the things we need to have happen. So struggling can have a negative connotation, but how do you think that made you a better leader going through that situation?
Sure, I think it made me realize that it is okay to fight for yourself, mm-hmm. and that struggles are worth it too, and they can make you a better person. But I felt like this was one of the first times, I may disagree with this, but one of the first times in my life that I felt like I was almost being selfish and saying, will you support me and advocate for me to take this path to open up possible opportunities? It felt selfish, but hopefully it's worth it
for the listeners, just to really talk about F-15 for a second. F-15 went to Baghdad for a year, so I don't think anybody would say that was selfish. People, you were mortared and rocketed
yes, sir.
Fairly routinely. So I don't think you have anything to worry about people thinking you were selfish.
Thanks, sir.
I think it was important, though, in that in my mind, I just want to explore it a little more with JB. You talked earlier about you might not have been getting the recognition that you thought you should have got. Or in the case of you were done being the OG, why am I not going to be a wing commander? It seems that the common thread there is communication, right? Your leadership wasn't explaining to you and communicating to you why these decisions were made. JB, can you talk about how critical communication is with your airmen in their becoming a leader?
That's the basis of a relationship, right? So
Right.
Transparency matters.
Right.
Context matters. Being able to explain the why behind our ops tempo or our battle rhythm carries a lot of weight, right? So, and it keeps the airmen grounded in reality. If you leave gaps, the human mind is very good at filling gaps with speculation, which generally is incorrect, right? So if I know the why behind why we're changing up our schedule, and I know it's for a very good reason, because we've got limited life components, and I've talked to missile maintenance, and I understand that piece. It's very easy for my airmen to go, oh yeah, do you need me to come in this weekend too? Because I'm in, right? So understanding the context of those things is incredibly important, and being very transparent in that, it matters.
Chris, when you look at it and you talk to your airmen, and an airman identifies a struggle they may be having on their development as a leader, how do you give them objective, honest feedback? Because I feel, as a senior officer, a lot of our airmen are consumed with stratification. They anchor their performance to a numerator and a denominator, and not really look at a larger context. So can you talk to that?
Yes, sir. A lot of it starts with just putting myself in their shoes and giving them stories about where I was at their point in life, how I wasn't stratified. In fact, I didn't even know what a wing strat was. I remember getting to top hat at my second ops tour, and as people shared OPRs or had discussions about what their first ops tours were like, and I was like, well, holy crap, I must have been a slug.
Yeah.
In just the paperwork that was there compared to others. But that's also part of it. It's you can't compare yourself, and it's coming up with that definition of success for each individual. That it's not a number, it's not a rank, it's not a position. And as much as I hated hearing it at the time, so I guess part of this is maybe just becoming old but seeing that it is true. It's doing the best with where you're at, and it's going to work out. So that's usually what I'll try and convey, not to get wrapped up in that. Work hard and give them stories about how I was a late bloomer, in key jobs that later on helped me to on-ramp. So doors are never fully closed.
Yeah. So along that lines, those can be very stressful situations for our young officers, right? Where they may be looking at their performance reports and they have an expectation that they're performing at this level, and they get feedback that maybe they're more middle of the pack. And so, Jason, how do you have those feedback sessions with the airmen and continue to develop them in becoming a leader, even though maybe the performance reporting period that you're assessing them on right now might not have worked out the way you and that airman thought it was going to work out?
Yes, sir. In those cases, really in all feedback, even when it's all positive, there's always some constructive piece that you can provide somebody from what you've seen. And for me, I often pull other folks in prior to the discussion to make sure that I understand not only from my perspective, but what others' perspective are. And when you're able to provide examples of situations, and then also provide examples of how you can see them either improving their performance, or if the performance is where it is, continue to do those things and make sure they understand that like this is great that you did here, or hey, here let's work on this together, because we could have got after that differently. But as a couple have already mentioned, it's about being transparent, and it's having those examples and having those encouraging words to be able to say, here's how we can get after this together.
Yeah, in becoming a leader, we develop leadership philosophies. And so, Kathy, can you talk to what were some of the influential people and influential situations that really helped form your leadership philosophy?
Yes, sir. I stole this from General Clark, who was the Commandant of Cadets while Bill was an Air Officer commanding at the Air Force Academy.
Okay.
So I never worked for
And that's
General
Lieutenant
Carter.
General Rich Clark now, who's the superintendent.
That's correct.
Okay.
Bill told me this, and I was like, that is brilliant. It's do the right thing at the right time for the right reason and press on. And what I like about that leadership philosophy, it's do the right thing. Okay, that's hard sometimes. Okay, the right thing is sometimes the difficult thing. Do the right thing at the right time. Be prompt. Make sure you're deliberate with your actions for the right reason. Make sure that you are doing things for the right motivations and that you're helping others.
Yeah.
And then press on, because there's so many things happening. You got to make a decision. Make sure you check that criteria, and then you move forward. And then the more Air Force way to put it is decisions should be rooted in the Air Force core values. That's a very simplified litmus test of the Air Force core values. You know, are we maintaining our integrity? Are we serving the Air Force and others before ourselves? And are we doing excellence in everything that we do? And if we can pass those tests, then as a leader, things are going to be okay.
F-15, how about yourself with your leadership philosophy?
So my overall philosophy is to connect airmen with the mission, give them a sense of why, right? So that's what my job is to do. And whether it's at this level in command or even in staff. And staff, it can sometimes be harder to find your why because you're further from
Sure.
the mission and the airmen and
Yeah.
doing it. But if I can give people an understanding of their why, their sense of purpose, how they matter, then it will, I think, make them know that they are an integral part of the team, and I think fulfill their sense of worth and help them perform at a higher level. So connecting the airmen to the mission, and that's really what I want to do.
JB, when you look at your leadership philosophy, clearly that influences your decision making.
Sure.
Can you talk about the relationship between the two and how you developed your leadership philosophy and how that influences the decisions you make, and then maybe an area where you said, hey, that was a really good decision, and then maybe an area where like, hey, I need to take a look at that decision that I made.
All right.
Tell your boss bad decision.
Yeah, the bad. Oh, here's all.
Doesn't have to be as your, it doesn't have to be as the helicopter group commander.
Right.
It can be as a staff officer at MAGCOM.
Yeah, of course. Well, first thing I usually ask when I'm trying to make a decision is it my decision to make?
Right.
Should this be higher than me, or am I actually stealing a decision from my subordinate? So I try not to make the decision if I can. If I can have it be a learning opportunity for someone that I'm supervising, I'm all for that. And I try to teach actually 5 different levels of decision making, but they're very simple, and I'll keep it brief. It's you decide, you never tell me. Number 2 is you decide and tell me after the fact, just simply for SA. Number 3 is you decide, but you give me a warn order. I intend to do this. That's to steal a line from Turn the Ship Around, right? And that's usually when you're not really sure if you're empowered to make that decision. I use that on you all the time, sir.
It's effective.
Yeah, and it gives you the opportunity to go, nope, that's my decision, right? And or offer me advice, right?
Yeah.
And then 4 is we talk about it ahead of time, and then the subordinate decides. And number 5 is very similar to that, even, but then I pull it up and I decide for us, but informed by that leader, right? So I try to do that myself, and there have been times if I have erred, it's been when I didn't use that framework myself, right? And I was quick to make a decision that, man, who knew better than my squadron commander that was right there, or my flight commander that was right there with hands on, knew the individual, knew the situation, and I looked at it and I recognized it as something that maybe it wasn't, and that's where I think I've gotten myself into trouble in the past.
Chris, when you look at leadership philosophy development, how do bad leaders affect that? Do you find them more valuable than good leaders?
It definitely usually leaves a mark more so. It's probably easier to remember the bad ones over the good. I mean, it's
Right.
almost like, you need 7 positive comments to overcome a negative one, or, you need a lot of more positive contacts and hugs, when you've had something bad happen in your life. I think there's a lot to be learned from a negative impact that you've had. It definitely sticks in your mind, but at the same time, I can remember all the positive ones, I think, for what they brought, how they influenced me, and could name them out throughout my career and the impact they had in different jobs. So maybe from an emotional impact or even an emotional impact for my wife, the bad ones stick out.
We talk as a leadership team within 20th Air Force that it's a precondition that we lead our airmen with dignity and respect. That is the foundation of everything we do. And so, Jason, you have an airman in your wing, and they come across toxic leadership. And what do you tell them to do?
First, I would ask the individual, have you had a conversation with your supervisor? Because depending on where this toxic leadership is coming from, are you comfortable with expressing this to that leader? Because this message needs to get to this person who is leading in this way. And looking, playing on what JB was just saying, which I think is a very important point, whether you're making decisions or whether you're trying to influence decisions, making sure that you are empowering those decisions at those right levels for folks to address things. Where it's something, it could be, if I'm in trouble, Airman Vadioni does not want the first sergeant or the commander to come and get him. Airman Vadioni wants Staff Sergeant Oguric to come and get him and be there for him. And so making sure that before you engage, so before I would engage, back to your question on the toxic leadership piece, has the person had an opportunity to know that what the decisions they're making, how they're behaving, is negatively influence the organization? Are the folks in the organization socializing that with her or him? And if they're not, encourage them to do so. And if they are not comfortable doing so, then figuring out where in the organization, is that me? Is it the chief? Is it the commander? Is it the shirt? Where is the right level to address that and start peeling that onion back before jumping in?
Okay, excellent. I appreciate everybody's time in our second podcast. The one point that I'd leave with is on becoming a leader, you're clearly influenced by all those things that have occurred in your life before you joined the Air Force. And so what our leadership team would say is bring those with you into the Air Force. Those are instrumental in refining yourself as a leader, in developing a leadership philosophy that's not only going to influence decision making, but it is also going to positively influence who you become as an officer or a senior NCO. So again, really appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you very much.
Well, Sentinel Warriors, hopefully you picked up some great ideas to add to your own leadership toolbox and feel inspired for your journey as you heard about struggles some of our current leaders have faced and overcome. Please join us next time for another insightful episode of 20 for 20.